The doorbell rang on a Tuesday afternoon, and with that simple sound, the world I had so carefully built began to fracture. A pleasant-looking woman with a kind smile stood on my porch, holding a clipboard like a shield. She introduced herself as a caseworker from Child Protective Services. She said an anonymous report had been made, a report concerning the welfare of my granddaughter, Letty. The air was sucked from my lungs, a sudden, violent vacuum in my chest. I looked over my shoulder at my daughter-in-law, Lucy, and watched the color drain from her face, her gentle eyes filling with a raw, animal terror. My name is Georgia, and for my entire life, my family has been my world. My husband and I worked hard to create a warm, stable home for our 3 sons, Louis, Cyril, and James. We weren't wealthy, but we were rich in love and support, a tight-knit unit against whatever the world threw at us. Now, with our youngest, James, his wonderful wife, Lucy, and our beautiful granddaughter, Letty, living with us, the house was full of life again. The sound of little feet pattering on the hardwood floors and Letty's happy shrieks were the music that filled my days. It felt like a reward for a life of hard work. But a shadow had been growing in the corners of our happy home, a subtle poison seeping into the foundations of our family. That shadow had a name, Jessa. She was my eldest son Louis's fiancée, and from the moment he brought her home, I felt a disquiet I couldn't name. It wasn't one big thing, but 1,000 tiny cuts. It was the way Jessa would compliment a dish Lucy made, while adding that her own mother used a much healthier recipe. It was the expensive, brand-name baby toy she'd give Letty, with a comment about how important it was for children to have the very best start in life. Her words were always coated in a thin layer of sweetness that made them impossible to challenge directly. If you called her out, she would look at you with wide, innocent eyes, the picture of confusion. She was a master of making you feel like you were the crazy one, the one creating a problem where none existed. I saw the way her thinly veiled contempt was wearing Lucy down. Lucy, who was so kind and gentle, began to second-guess herself, growing quieter and more withdrawn whenever Jessa was around. My son James saw it too, his jaw tightening every time Jessa aimed a passive-aggressive dart at his wife. I tried to talk to my husband about it, my voice low in the quiet of our bedroom at night. I told him I was worried, that Jessa seemed to enjoy creating friction. He'd sigh, telling me to just let it go. He said confronting Louis would only cause a bigger fight and drive him away. He wasn't wrong. Louis had changed since meeting Jessa. My confident, easygoing son had become arrogant, almost brittle. He seemed to carry a chip on his shoulder, especially around his younger brother, James. A deep, ugly jealousy I'd never seen in him before was now plain as day. Jessa nurtured that jealousy, feeding it with whispers and private complaints. She had convinced Louis that we favored James, that we didn't respect him or his choices. It was a fantasy, a complete fabrication, but it was a story he desperately wanted to believe. It gave him an excuse for his own bitterness. So I tried to keep the peace, just like my husband advised. I smiled through Jessa's little digs. I hosted family dinners where the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I did it because my deepest fear was fracturing the family, of losing my son. I believed, with a mother's desperate hope, that Louis would eventually see reason. I held on to the belief that family loyalty was an unbreakable bond. I thought that if I was just patient enough, just nurturing enough, the goodness we had instilled in our son would eventually win out over her toxic influence. It was a terrible mistake, and my granddaughter was about to pay the price for my inaction. The caseworker's tour of our home was a quiet, polite violation. She walked through my living room, the sanctuary where I had rocked my own sons to sleep. She inspected Letty's bedroom, a place filled with love, stuffed animals, and carefully chosen storybooks. She looked in our refrigerator, our pantry. Every corner of our lives was laid bare, examined for evidence of our failure, our supposed neglect. The caseworker was professional, even kind. It was clear to me that she saw nothing wrong, that she was just following a procedure. But that didn't lessen the sting of the accusation. It didn't erase the shame. After she left, assuring us the case would likely be closed immediately, Lucy finally broke. She collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table and sobbed deep, ragged breaths that tore at my heart. James wrapped his arms around her, his own face a mask of fury and helplessness. This was their reward for being good people, for being loving parents. I stood by the window, watching the caseworker's car pull away from the curb. There was no doubt in my mind who had made that call. No one else would be so cruel. No one else would delight in using a state agency as a weapon to terrorize a young mother. It was Jessa's masterpiece of manipulation. She and Louis thought this would break us. They believed they could use our love for Letty to control and intimidate us. They thought our financial and emotional support was their birthright, something they could never lose no matter what they did. They had fundamentally misunderstood the woman I am. In that moment, watching my family shatter, something inside me didn't just break. It hardened. The patient, peacekeeping matriarch burned away, leaving behind something cold and clear and made of steel. My unwillingness to confront conflict was gone, incinerated by a righteous fire. They had crossed a line. They hadn't just insulted Lucy or disrespected James. They hadn't just hurt my feelings. They had come for my granddaughter. They had tried to use the power of the state to take a child from her loving family. And for that, there would be no forgiveness. There would only be consequences, and those consequences would be swift, silent, and absolute. After the caseworker left, after I held a sobbing Lucy in my arms and assured her that she was a wonderful mother and that everything would be okay, the white-hot rage I expected never came. It was as if the emotional storm had passed over me entirely, leaving behind a profound, icy calm. All the anxiety I had carried for months, the constant worry about saying the right thing, the desperate hope for reconciliation, it all just evaporated. The knot in my stomach was gone. In its place was a quiet, unshakable certainty. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving James to comfort his wife, and went into the living room. My eyes landed on a framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was from years ago, a happy summer day before life had become so complicated. All three of my boys were there, arms slung around each other, grinning at the camera. Cyril, my steady middle son, James, my sweet youngest, and Louis, my firstborn. I stared at his face in the picture, at the bright, hopeful eyes of the boy I had raised, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pain, just a deep, sorrowful finality. The son I knew was gone. He had been replaced by this stranger, this weak and cruel man who would allow his fiancée to endanger his own niece out of petty spite. That person could no longer be a part of our lives. My hands were perfectly steady as I picked up my phone from the end table. There was no trembling, no hesitation. I found my husband's number and pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and unsuspecting. "Hey, hun, what's up?" I didn't cry, I didn't raise my voice. I spoke with a clarity that felt foreign and yet completely natural. "They called Child Protective Services on James and Lucy," I said. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, then dead silence. I let the weight of my words sink in before I continued. "It's over. You need to tell Louis to come get the rest of his things from our house." My husband knows me. He knows the years of patience I have shown, the deep well of my forgiveness. He also knows that when my voice gets that quiet, that calm, a line has been crossed from which there is no return. He didn't argue. He didn't question me. All he said was, "I'll be home in 20 minutes. My unique skill isn't in business or law. I've never run a boardroom or argued a case. My strength, the power my husband and I have built together over 40 years, is in being the heart and co-manager of this family's emotional and financial ecosystem. We built this life, this home, this network of support, and we control the resources that sustain it. The revenge I was planning wouldn't be loud or dramatic. There would be no screaming matches or public scenes. It would be a quiet, total, and irreversible amputation. The blueprint formed in my mind with crystalline clarity. We would target Louis's greatest vulnerability, the one Jessa had so carefully cultivated in him. His arrogant, unshakable assumption that our support was an unconditional birthright. When my husband walked through the door, he looked at my face and saw the decision was already made. He hugged me tightly, a silent acknowledgement of the pain and a promise of his unwavering support. We sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Lucy had wept just an hour before. It was no longer a family table. It was our war room. "He can't come back from this," my husband said, his voice a low rumble. "To use Letty to do that to his own brother." He shook his head, his face etched with a sorrow that mirrored my own. "He won't," I confirmed. "We're not going to fight with him. We're not going to argue. We are simply going to give him exactly what he and Jessa seem to want, a life completely separate from this family, a life without our help." The first step was the most obvious. "All financial support ends immediately," I stated. "The $5,000 we promised for the rehearsal dinner is off the table. His car insurance is up for renewal next month. We will not be paying it. His cell phone will be removed from our family plan at the end of the billing cycle." My husband nodded, pulling a notepad and pen from a drawer. He began to write, his movements precise and methodical. This was how we worked. I was the heart, and he was the hands. I set the direction, and he executed the details flawlessly. "Second," I continued, my voice even, "all emotional and logistical support is withdrawn. He is no longer welcome in our home. The locks will be changed tomorrow morning after he retrieves his belongings. He is to have no contact with James, Lucy, or Letty. We will inform Cyril of the situation and our decision. Louis and Jessa are not to be invited to any future family gatherings." We were systematically dismantling the safety net that had been beneath him his entire life. The network of cousins who could get him a good deal on repairs. The family friends who would offer him advice. The simple comfort of knowing he had a home to come back to if things ever went wrong. He had betrayed the very foundation of that network. The plan was not to destroy him. In a strange way, it was to set him free. We were going to let him have the life he chose, completely and utterly without the invisible support system he always took for granted. He wanted to prove his own worth and the superiority of his new life with Jessa. We were finally going to give him the chance to do it. Alone. Alone. That was the core of it. My husband made the call to Louis, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. He kept it simple, telling him his remaining things had been boxed up and were waiting in the garage. He could come get them in the morning. There was no room for negotiation. The next morning, the house was a tomb. We made sure James, Lucy, and Letty were gone, taking them out for a long breakfast at a diner across town. I would not, allow them to be subjected to another moment of this drama. This was our burden to carry, our mess to clean. When Louis's car pulled into the driveway, my husband and I were waiting. We didn't open the door for him. We stood on the porch, a united and unbreakable front. I stood beside my husband, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back, a silent gesture of support that spoke volumes. Louis got out of his car, a familiar, arrogant smirk already playing on his lips. He was expecting a fight, an emotional scene he could manipulate. He was preparing to be the victim, the misunderstood son. We gave him nothing of the sort. "What is this?" he asked, gesturing to us. "Some kind of ambush." I took a breath, the morning air cool and clean in my lungs. "There is no ambush, Louis," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a frozen lake. "We just needed to say this to you face to face. By involving a government agency and traumatizing your brother's family, you crossed a line that can never be uncrossed." I let the words hang in the air between us. "We will always love you, Louis," I continued, and it was the truth. A mother's love is a stubborn, resilient thing. "But we cannot support you or your marriage after this. We cannot have this poison in our family." He started to argue, to deflect, his hands gesturing wildly. "It wasn't like that. Jessa was just concerned, you know how sensitive Lucy is. We were just trying to make sure Letty was okay." It was a pathetic, transparent lie. My husband took a step forward, and the force of his quiet presence made Louis fall silent. "Louis, look at me," he commanded. My son reluctantly met his father's gaze. "Did you, for 1 second, truly believe your niece was in any danger in this house?" The question hung in the air, a perfect, unanswerable accusation. Louis couldn't answer. He looked away, his jaw working. He backtracked, stammering about misunderstandings and overreactions. He tried to brush it all away, a master of minimizing the pain he caused. "Come on," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. James will get over it. He always does. That was the moment. The casual cruelty, the absolute lack of remorse. It solidified everything. He will not get over this, I told him, my voice dropping, losing any trace of warmth. It was now the voice of a judge delivering a sentence. You will likely never see your brother or your niece again. You need to understand that. I watched his entitled smirk finally falter. It was replaced by a flicker of raw panic in his eyes, the look of a man who suddenly realizes the ground beneath his feet is not solid. He had always believed he was untouchable, that our love and support were an infinite resource he could abuse at will. For the first time, he saw the bottom of the well. His panic quickly curdled into rage. You're choosing him over me, he spat, his finger pointing at the house, at the life he was now exiled from. After everything you've done for him, letting him live here for free, you always liked him better. The old, tired accusation. The lie Jessa had whispered in his ear until he believed it was his own thought. I didn't even have the energy to be hurt by it anymore. Get your things, I said simply, my voice flat, and get out. The house was deafeningly quiet after he left. I walked through the rooms, the silence a heavy blanket. The empty space in the guest room closet, where his childhood memory boxes had been stored, felt like a wound. But it was a clean wound, a necessary surgery to remove a sickness before it could spread any further. Later that night, after we had explained everything, James sat quietly on the sofa. He held up his phone, the screen glowing in the dim light. It showed Louis's contact photo, his smiling face from a happier time. Below it was a single option in red letters, block. James pressed it without a word, a quiet, final click that echoed the closing of a door. My middle son, Cyril, called a few hours later. My husband had already filled him in. Cyril was the steady one, the diplomat of the family, and I had worried he would try to broker a peace we could no longer accept. But his voice was firm. I'll go to the wedding ceremony, he told us. I feel like I have to do that much, but I won't stay for the reception. I'll make my excuses and leave. The lines had been drawn, clear and stark. Louis was now on an island. It was an island he had built himself, brick by brick, with Jessa as his sole architect. He was completely isolated from the family he had tried to weaponize for his own gain. He had made his choice. And the immediate consequence was a profound and total silence from those who had loved him most. His power, the leverage he thought he held over us, was entirely dependent on our engagement, on our emotional response. By refusing to play his game, by simply withdrawing, we had taken it all away. He was left with nothing but the life he had chosen. He was left with nothing but the life he had chosen, and in the profound silence that followed, 6 months passed like a quiet, steady exhalation. The dust of our family's implosion settled, and the landscape that emerged was clearer, calmer, and healthier than I could have imagined. We heard about the wedding from Cyril. It was a sparsely attended affair, held at a sterile event hall chosen by Jessa. He described it as a performance, a hollow victory lap for a race no one else was running. He said Louis looked thin, and the smile he wore never quite reached his eyes. Shortly after, they moved to another state to be near Jessa's family. Louis took a job with my husband's direct competitor, a final, petty severing of ties that felt more sad than insulting. It was the desperate act of a man trying to prove he didn't need us, while using the very industry his father had taught him to do it. We hear nothing from him now. His birthday passed a month ago without a call. The holidays came and went in a strange, muted peace. There is a grief in it, of course, a quiet ache for the son I once knew. But his ruin, I've come to realize, is not in poverty or failure. It is in his profound and absolute isolation. He traded a universe of love for a single, tiny island. Meanwhile, our family, though smaller, has become stronger. The constant, low-grade anxiety that used to hum beneath the surface of our lives is gone. In its place, there is an easy comfort, a genuine warmth that had been choked for so long. The wound was deep, but it was a clean cut, and now it could finally heal. Cyril and his wonderful fiancée, Rosa, bought a house just down the street from us. It's a charming little place that needs a lot of work, and my husband and James are over there almost every weekend. They come home covered in sawdust and paint, tired but happy, bonded by the shared work of building something new. Lucy is thriving. Without the constant threat of Jessa's passive-aggressive poison, she has blossomed. Her confidence has returned, and she is set to graduate from college a semester early, at the top of her class. To see her laugh freely, to watch her hold her daughter without a shadow of fear in her eyes, has been the greatest reward. My husband and I are helping them with a down payment on a house of their own, just a few blocks away from Cyril's. It's important for them to have their own space, their own sanctuary, but I need them close. I need to be able to walk over with a warm meal, to have my granddaughter run into my arms whenever she pleases. My days are filled with a simple, beautiful rhythm. The sound of Letty's laughter echoing in the garden. The smell of my husband's coffee in the morning. The joy of planning family dinners where everyone feels safe and loved. The quiet peace of a home that is finally, truly, a sanctuary again. The choice we made was the hardest of my life. It went against every instinct I had as a mother. But I see now that my real job wasn't to hold the family together at any cost. It was to protect it from the sickness that was tearing it apart. Louis got what he wanted, a life with Jessa as the center of his world. And we, in the end, got what we so desperately needed: peace.